Welcome to the World Extreme Medicine podcast. My name is Jen Sherman, doctor, coach and expedition medic. If you're a paramedic, doctor, nurse, physio, or indeed anyone working in healthcare who has a curious and adventurous mind, then this is the podcast for you. Today, we're going to be talking about ultramarathons, coaching, resilience, purpose, and I'm sure a few more things. To explore this with me in this episode, I have the pleasure of welcoming Anna Marie Watson. Anna Marie has two big passions, ultramarathons and coaching outdoors. Pre-COVID, she regularly achieved podium positions on the International Ultra World Tour Series and the Marathon des Sables. Having served in the British Army, she is no stranger to operating in challenging and extreme environments. And when not running, she can be found in the great outdoors, coaching business leaders and athletes. Welcome, Anna Marie, to the podcast. How are you doing?
It's a beautiful Sunday morning, and having a chat about ultra running and coaching is, well, what else would you want to do on a Sunday morning? Let's be honest. And I've got a cup of tea, so life is good.
Life's very good. Life's very good. And our listeners might probably won't be able to see this whenever they listen, but Anna Marie's also got a wonderful OS maps behind her as her background. So just demonstrating, I'm sure, lots of trails, Anna Marie, is it?
Oh, yes, that's partly what it's there for. But in the process of kind of setting up a home office, and thought that it would be great to have kind of 4 OS maps put together, which is actually far more tricky to do than you think it might be. So there was a lot of glue all over the place, and it's not completely square, I won't lie. But yeah, it's all centered around Trowbridge, which is where I'm based at the moment in Southwest Wiltshire. And it is great for kind of hunting out trails. And it's amazing what is on your doorstep. I will admit, I'm normally one for jetting off and discovering far-flung places. Though clearly that's not really possible at the moment. So I've been very much firmly stuck in Wiltshire, though. I mean, even yesterday I was out just discovering some new routes around Bath, which is just, what it's all about at the moment.
Interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, just to start us off, I wonder, just for the listeners' purpose, I mean, how did you end up getting into the ultramarathon kind of circuit? What was your entry point into that?
Well, my initial entry point into the ultra world actually was back in the late 90s, which was when I officially did my first ultra, which I didn't actually realise because it kind of somehow consigned it to the depths of my memory. But during a COVID-inspired clear out, I discovered a certificate from doing the 50-miler Tour de Triggs up in, I think it was the Peak District. I was a part of Manchester and Salford OTC, and we were part of a team who went and did that. So that was my first ultra. So I kind of started pretty young. In fact, before I did my first marathon. And then it's all about my innate love of being outdoors and then running and how they combine. And I think when you're a runner, you kind of find your niche. And for some people that's on the road, some people it's marathons. And I'm very goal driven, very up, I won't lie. But for me, it's all about kind of going long. How far can I push myself physically, mentally, and emotionally? And then kind of everything kind of almost kind of comes together. And having an apartment in Chamonix, which I call my mountain home, on the doorstep, you can't help but be inspired by the mountains. And I just love being out in the mountains, overnight, moving through the landscape. It's very much, for me, it's a journey. And seeing the kind of the day transition to night and then back to day again, it's just a time when I just feel very kind of in the moment. There's probably a form of escapism to it as well, but very much kind of connected to nature, to something which is bigger than me. And yeah, that's where it kind of all started. And then I think once I started and you get in touch with other ultra runners and you hear about other races, it's almost like the world is your dream. Where do you kind of start? And having lived and worked all over the world, I've then kind of combined it into, part of my lifestyle. And it's been very incremental. I can't really kind of say like an actual point where it really started, but definitely, doing the Marathon des Sables back in 2015, that was in a way my entry onto the, the international arena, and coming second at that and in the top 50 was absolutely phenomenal as an athlete. And I surprised myself and a lot of other people. And then since then, I've been, fortunate to go and do some other amazing races on the Ultra Trail World Tour Series.
Interesting. So it sounds like, running obviously over time as well, the meaning that it's given to your life is kind of increased and been consolidated. One thing that's really interesting though for me is that you kind of surprised yourself when you did so well back when you first competed in the Marathon des Sables. I mean, I wonder, just from a psychological perspective, what were your expectations when you first went into that race?
So I was living out in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia when I was training for it. And I really struggled with expat life, living as a partner, being unable to work. So for me, the Marathon des Sables was a focus. And it's something that I really channeled my efforts into, definitely for a good 6 months beforehand. I've always had an athletic basis. It's not that I came from nothing, that would be a lie. And, before that, I had competed in the Ironman 70.3 World Championships as an age grouper. And I'd done, long distance and triathlon. So it wasn't as if I was coming from nothing. It's been, even in 2015, it had been a 10-year journey since I'd done, my first marathon. I'd done other ultras. Albeit, I'd kind of been more of a participant. I'd kind of literally crept around the CCC in 2007, I think it was, literally hitting every cutoff and just finishing within the 24-hour time limit. Though it had been there, but for the Marathon des Sables, I was taking it seriously. I worked with a coach for the first time. I had a plan. I was absorbed into the preparation of it, and getting the kit and getting it as light as possible and working out my food. It was very much in the preparation, and this very much kind of comes down to the planning and preparation, physically training, but also mentally as well. So I've spoken to a lot of people who've done it, picked their brains. So I wanted to go and do the best that I could. And I was also going with a friend, and it was her second time. So it was also about catching up with my friend Leslie. So kind of getting there, and, I had a really strong, long day, and a lot about the Marathon des Sables having that long day, and everything kind of fell into place. There is an element of luck to it, I think. You can put as much preparation in as possible, but ultimately within an ultra, because of the time span, there's more potential for things to kind of go right or wrong. And sometimes you just can't predict, stomach issues can be a huge thing with ultra runners, and that is often what they kind of have some reaction to, and which is what happened to me in my second attempt at the Marathon des Sables when I was, I guess, fifth lady instead. So yeah, it was kind of over the days, it's a 6-day event, and I kind of finished kind of really very much kind of tried to held back in the first couple of days, but then it all kind of builds, and it's like a realization wow, I am doing this well. And even finishing it was still, it's all a bit of a dream, particularly now kind of looking back.
Interesting. And you mentioned about obviously the plan and the preparation for the ultras is as important, and from what I'm kind of gathering, as the actual event. I mean, I wonder also from a mental preparation perspective, what is it that you're focusing on in the run up to those events mentally?
So I very much get drawn into the route. The route is the big thing for me, and getting familiar with the route. And particularly, I mean, the Marathon des Sables, it wasn't possible, and they actually keep the route a surprise until the beginning of the event, and then you get issued with the roadmap. But in subsequent races, what I've done is very much studied the route. Ideally, that's getting out and training on the environment, so you kind of literally get to know it. I'm very visual, so for me, having those visual cues of, okay, what villages am I moving through, where are the climbs, where are the valleys, where are the whether the key points. So for me, I can kind of mentally kind of cross them off in my mind. But if I can't do that, then it's very much about getting the profile or the routes kind of up on my office. And when I did the UTMB in preparation for that in 2017, I had the profile and the route and the distances between checkpoints pinned up in my office. So they were there, they were ingrained. And with the UTMB, I'd walked the route several times, just trekking, but then going out and training on it as well. So I knew it almost at the back of my hand. And for me, that familiarity really kind of grounds me. I know the terrain. And as I'm moving through it, it gives me, just kind of an element of assurance and security. Because often when you look at these numbers that are involved in ultra races, particularly the height that I'm going, 10,000 meters for the UTMB, 160 kilometers, my brain can't compute it. It's too big. So it's how can I get my head around it? So when I'm stood on the start line, I'm not overwhelmed, I'm not daunted. And believe me, standing on the start of the UTMB with 2,500 other people, that's a big thing. It's emotional. When the music kind of comes up, the Van Crede, I can't remember the name, but it's wow. Okay. And then just being able to focus on the moment and not let that kind of distract you. Just enjoy it. And ultimately you've been there and you've earned it. And I do believe, the races for me, it's not just about the event. The event is a part of it. It is all about the preparation and then the event itself. And then actually afterwards as well, I think a lot of time, and I've been in danger of this at the beginning, particularly, and I now try to, very much give myself time to recover and to reflect on what you've been through, because it is a journey. It's a big, and it's about the stress you're putting on your body physically, mentally, and emotionally as well. You're pushing the limits. And actually, if you don't give yourself then time to decompress, how do you kind of come through that? And you kind of, post-race blues is a thing. And how can you kind of ease back into, almost life without such a big focus? And there is a danger of that I kind of felt almost I got to a point where it was just chasing the next race. Like, what is next? What's next on the circuit? And I think that can be quite a dangerous place when you're living for the future and actually not maybe enjoying the present moment so much. So particularly I found with COVID, because I haven't got a next race, how can I actually bring it back and just enjoy running for running? And I really miss, the travel, hands up, the camaraderie. Being a part of the ultra community gives me so much, like the social side of things, that emotional connection to people. I do really miss that. And yes, I love going out, and I've been doing some FKTs in the local area, which is, it's great, though it's not, competing at an international level.
Not at all. And I think it's really interesting. Obviously, past year it's been challenging for us all on different levels. But I wonder, just picking up on what you're saying there, when something like being part of that circuit, the ultramarathon circuit, and the community, which essentially it involves as well, with the loss of that over the last year, I wonder, in terms of your own identity, how have you managed that over the last year?
Pretty badly at times. I was lucky last year to have a race in Gran Canaria in February, so I managed to get out, and I'm part of a French team, WAA. What an adventure! I've been, supported as one of their elite athletes since 2016, and it's been great to have that partnership ongoing. They're very much connected to the half marathon dressage brand, and there's athletes that I've known 4 or 5 years. We've raced together, so some of them were out in Gran Canaria in February this year, 2021, and it was great to see them be able to, though I had proper FOMO going on. I wanted to be there. I was there last year. We had an athlete meet up afterwards, and we were up by Roca Nubla doing, some product shoots for the new items of kit are coming out for the summer range, and, living together in a house and cooking together. And it was, it's all kind of that kind of family vibe almost. So to not have that is it's a big loss. I've put a lot of my identity, particularly over the last few years, on being an athlete and also being a coach. And I very much found with COVID, particularly in the beginning, they were both taken away from me. I do predominantly work face-to-face with individuals or facilitate small workshops, whether that's in London or Geneva. And again, that's not been possible. So in a way, it's been a massive pausing, like a car crash of a stop, and then kind of exploring myself. Okay, who am I if I'm not an athlete and I'm not a coach? What remains? How do I strip things back so I kind of rediscover myself as Anna, and I don't have to put everything on, succeeding at racing or being the most, thought-leading coach about taking coaching outdoors? How do you kind of really bring it back to yourself as an individual? And, there's still good days and bad days. As much as I loved my training session yesterday doing hill reps up and down Bath, there was that part of me that was longing to be, in Chamonix in my mountain home, going up and down Brabant. So it's that balance of being grateful for what I have had in the past, but not living in the past, and not grieving too much because it's a loss in a way. And then being grateful for what I do have in the present, because I am incredibly lucky on so many different levels. And then just being, optimistic for the future and what it may bring, even though that in itself is so uncertain.
Absolutely. And I think, the other aspect of all of that really is also, how do you think this period of pausing, as so I think really aptly kind of describe it, how is that, or could that, or do you think it will change how you move forward with your passions of running and of coaching? Do you feel that this time has informed those in a way?
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm still working through that. It's almost with the racing. I kind of question myself, have I, achieved what I wanted to achieve in my racing? Is that part of my life done? I don't know. There was 2 races that I always wanted to take part in, and that was the Marathon des Sables and the UTMB. I stood on the podium of both and more. And, is that enough? At what point is that enough? Or are we on that kind of continual pursuit for more? And actually, at what point do you go, actually, okay, let's stop? The amount that I have given into my ultra running, and it's bloody hard work. And it may come across, on social media as you kind of breeze in and out of races, and it's kind of quite easy. Though, like, the hours and the effort and the energy that gets channeled into it is colossal. And actually, at one point, does that then start to detract from the enjoyment of it? And, I put pressure on myself at times, far too much pressure. And I've, kind of over-raced. I now, looking back in hindsight, say, and overworked as well, is getting that balance. I was trying to get my coaching business off the ground and building partnerships with different kind of companies, and that in itself, there's only, so much that you can do, which, I reckon I do have a fairly addictive personality, and that does give you the drive, though actually at one point does that become a danger as well, and you do push yourself too much, because it's a very fine line. And I do reckon that there's been points where I've been extremely close to burnout, and actually then how do you kind of come back from that?
Really interesting. And it brings up for me, there's in the psychological literature, there's a lot kind of written about this idea of having passions, and actually how your passions can either be obsessive or they can be harmonious, and actually the impact of that on your well-being. So if you're obsessively passionate about something, so i.e. it consumes your focus, it's actually been correlated like with a lot of detrimental kind of well-being factors, versus if it's harmonious. And I think you've already just used the word yourself. And by that, what I guess I'm kind of saying is it's balanced. It's a balanced passion. So it's not consuming kind of mentally, emotionally, and time-wise everything else. It's balanced in with other domains of your life. That form of passion is seen to be a very positive for your well-being, because being passionate is a positive thing. And passion as a concept's been around since the Greeks, basically. So it's really interesting what you're actually saying is on your own reflections, and that balance is a word, balance and presence. I'm hearing are 2 things that you yourself are keep coming back to in all of this.
Yeah, it is. We're all on a lifelong learning journey, and often it's a relearning at times.
100%.
And it is like, what is that driver? When does it become slightly unhealthy? And I know for me, I've very much had, a driver for me is a need to prove myself. A need to, I was in the army, for Christ's sake, for 9 years, and very much, I was a female, I was a small female. It is almost very much like, as a female within that organization, you kind of had to do twice as much to kind of get the recognition, because straight away you were a girl, you're kind of on the back foot, you had to prove yourself. Well, that's what I felt. That was the way I saw the world. And I almost kind of would cherry pick the units that were hard. So I went to one Allied Command Europe Mobile Force Land, which doesn't exist anymore. It was part of NATO. And it was, you'd go on attachment with the Marines. So I went through the Arctic warfare training just out of, my officer training. That was my first job in Norway, digging snow holes and jumping in, doing ice breaking drills and all of that jazz. It's like I've never chosen an easy route physically or mentally for myself. It's almost like I've hunted out these opportunities which I need to push myself. I need to kind of strive for something. It's like, actually, I can do this. I'm bloody good at it, almost at what cost. Going through Santos, I was top of my platoon. So it's very much, I have been that kind of high achiever / overachiever. And at what point is that, at what point do you just kind of go, actually, life is to enjoy. I don't constantly have to be striving for something.
Interesting, isn't it? And I think Well, it's a process, isn't it? And I think it's so key to that. And you can hear it in what you're saying as well as reflection, isn't it? It's reflection on experience and reflecting on your experiences and saying, at what point is this tipping towards something which I need to swing the pendulum back into the middle a little bit. So it's kind of an active, ongoing, reflective kind of process.
And it kind of almost came to fruition. I had my first DNF. Dreaded DNF in the ultra running world. It's like, don't talk about that kind of thing. And it was diagonal defoe at the end of 2019 in Reunion Island, which is this kind of tiny little French enclave nestled between Mauritius and Madagascar. It's a tropical island, and it's just vicious. It is, 100-miler. And there's a lot of bandied around in the ultramarathon world, what's the toughest? It was all about kind of, the toughest, the hardest, challenge yourself. And, diagonal defoe does tick most of the boxes, I won't lie. And yeah, I got to that point. It was the end of a year I'd raced a lot, and I was just done. And I knew I would have had another 30 hours to go. And I was just like, I'm done. Kind of thing. I'm just like, for today, that was me. I mean, clearly it's quite an expensive lesson flying halfway around the world to get to that point. Maybe I could have done it slightly cheaper financially. But hey, yeah. And having had that, it really marked me. And even now it's like, at some point, do I go back? Do I not go back? How do you address failure? Because I think failure within our society is something that we kind of don't talk about, and particularly within, the corporate world and failure, how does that sit? And actually, yes, it's an element of risk. And if we don't address risk, then how do we kind of learn? And you see it within the education system as well. And with my clients, coaching wise within the business world, like this fear of failure, and how do you kind of work through that? And how are you perceived if you do fail? I think there's a lot there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think also, although there's a lot discussed about there's no such thing as failure, only good learning, I think I'm not quite sure culturally we're there yet.
No.
I don't really feel that we are, particularly in the UK anyway, because it's, as you say, failure is still something that's banded around from a very early stage of education. So we get conditioned to hearing that word as well, don't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that phrase as well. And I think it's something that we can really all hold close to us as a kind of like a bit of a North Star, though I don't think culturally and societally we're there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think sometimes as well, the fear of failure is at its greatest when we are the most strong. The fear of failure is its greatest in connection with those things which we attach to most strongly in our identity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think the things we care about the most, the things we are most passionate about, that's where it gets sticky because the stakes are higher, aren't they? It's, yeah.
And I think that's as I was racing more and racing in, some amazing races, be that, Lavaredo, Mumbai, UTMB, I could list off Sri Lanka, Ultra X, multi-stage. And it was almost like the more I did, the more my identity was attached to being an athlete and a successful athlete. How then does that then increase the pressure as I'm stood on that start line? Because there is that, well, if I fail, then that is a reflection on me. And it's how do you divorce yourself? It's like, I'm not a failure. Actually, at this task, at this moment in time, yes, I failed. And it's very different. It's very different. And I think I've been guilty in the past of very much embracing it and labeling myself, I'm a failure. And that's when you start to really, owning that emotionally or thinking that emotionally, it's not healthy.
Yeah, I think it's my own reflections on this is it's very much an inward process, and an inward process of meditation, reflection, writing. It's trying to untether ourselves from some of these extrinsic kind of extrinsic self-worth type ideas, isn't it? But that's that again is a process.
Yeah, and I think for me it's in a way lockdown, just being able to go out, me and the landscape. And for me, movement helps those reflections. It's very much a processing part of it. It's that headspace after a day of supporting my clients. And ultimately now, I'm working virtually online. So my life pretty much work-wise is through a screen, which when I kind of brand myself as free range, it's a challenge, it's fatiguing. It's a different form of attention as well. It's very focused, very hard. And that drains me in a different way. So actually to be able to remove myself from that situation and head outside. And yes, you're surrounded by nature. There's that restorative kind of green, though being rather brown in Wiltshire, quite muddy over the winter, I won't lie. But that combination of that movement as well, ultimately when you look evolutionary, we were designed to move. So it's okay, how can I use that to help accept the situation and, let go of certain things? Because ultimately, if we cling to some things too tightly, how does that then actually enable us to open up to what else is going on and have an awareness of what other opportunities may emerge? And actually, it is looking at it in a slightly reframe. Okay, COVID-wise has actually brought me a lot of opportunities as well. And I did sit down at New Year and do like a gratitude exercise, which I was surprised at how long it was, because also sometimes I can be a little bit kind of glass half full, and it's switching that up.
Interesting. Very interesting. And I think that streamlines really nicely actually into, I think you've already started talking about obviously your coaching background as well. So I wonder, just for the purpose of our listeners, if you could just give us a bit of background of how you actually ended up coaching and coaching outdoors.
Yeah, the backstory question. So when I was in the army, leading my soldiers, what I found was effective was ultimately being in their place, making sure that they were comfortable. Where do they feel centered? And then ultimately listening was a massive part of it, and asking questions. And at the time I didn't realize I was doing some form of coaching in its basic kind of skills, though ultimately as a leader, my style was very coach-like. And then when I left the army, my last job had been in leadership and development, working with students. And I loved seeing kind of students come in and having these conversations with them, and actually how then did that shift their mindsets and change aspirations and support them working towards specific goals. So it's almost like, the threads were there, though at the time I had no idea that this would be like a future career for me. I didn't even realize that coaching was a thing. And if you'd suggested to me when leaving the army and transiting into civilian life that actually working with a coach might be beneficial, I would have been like, what's a coach? You're crazy. I'm fine. I don't need any help, kind of thing. That was very much kind of my kind of values were very much around freedom and independence, and I can do it by myself. I don't need any help. Very kind of individualistic. Though when I was working in the Middle East, one of my colleagues was a trainer in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And he was putting on a course over the summer, in Abu Dhabi when it's super hot. What would you really do? I'm not much of a shopper, I won't lie. And you'd get up at 4:00 in the morning to go for a run. So by the time you'd done your training for the day, what else do you do? So I jumped at the chance. And this is almost where my kind of learning started again. I kind of, at school, I was very conscientious. That was always my school reports. By the time I got to university, I was done. I wanted a job. I wanted out. I wanted to travel. And then I kind of came full circle. And I do think there's very much times of learning periods for different people at different stages within their life. And for me, once I started on this kind of learning about, personal development and growth and leadership and resilience and well-being and coaching, like hours off, you couldn't stop me. I just kind of literally went from course to course to course. And I was a little bit of like a learning junkie, and I was very much in that discovery phase. Though also I, transited out of the army, which in itself is huge, 9 years in the military, moved into the learning development world. And then, okay, I was doing these coaching courses, and then what? And this is often the way with coaches, is that you're in some management role potentially, you may do some coaching qualifications, but then how do you set yourself up as a coach? Like the business side of it is very different. And actually the business side is often what is the missing link, and what people don't kind of really get, because it's very different from having some coaching skills, but then actually translating that into kind of like a business. How do you actually, make some money out of it? Because ultimately at the heart of it, within the way society is set up at the moment, there is a financial element to things, and how can you make it successful? So it's been very gradual. I did my first coaching qualification back in 2010. That was 11 years ago. And then it has been a real gradual shift from, yes, being employed full-time, doing the qualifications, getting a few clients on the side, to then working on like interim projects, for example. or doing part-time work and balancing it with my coaching. And in between, I studied for a master's in teaching at Sydney University. And then, yes, I was fortunate to kind of accompany my husband to Saudi Arabia and then back to the UK. And it wasn't until I kind of really landed back in the UK in 2015, I was like, okay, how can this be a business? How can I kind of set this up? And for me now, it is very much about having a portfolio. And yes, I do some associate work, and I balance that then out with my private clients and what I kind of love doing. Throughout that journey, I've very much found my coaching niche within coaching outdoors. And then again, I didn't know that when I first did my first coaching qualification. I just went to learn. Coaching outdoors wasn't even a thing. It wasn't even mentioned on any of the courses. I do remember going and doing all of my peer coaching qualifications. So whenever on the course there was a chance to have a peer conversation, and even in Abu Dhabi when it was super hot, if there was an opportunity to stand by a window and look out of the window, or go onto the rooftop if it was a bit cooler, or go for a walk around the block, I would always place that request to the individual who was coaching me if it would be an option. Because straight away, you know, for me, my natural affinity is to be outside, is to be moving, or at least, you know, to be able to look out of a window. And even now I'm looking out the window now behind the screen, having that kind of sense of, actually, I feel confined inside. Outside, for me, I feel a lot more grounded. So, and ultimately within coaching, you want to feel grounded. You want to feel, you know, inspired. You want an element of creativity, because it's all about changing your mindset or thinking beyond what you have at the moment. Okay, what do you want to achieve? And then how are you going to get there? So actually, for me, I find that I do a lot of my thought, I do most of my thinking outside and moving. Okay, let's bring it into the coaching world. So that's when I've kind of started to kind of dabble and experiment with it. And it's kind of one of those really weird places where some people have been doing this for years. It's not new, it's not rocket science. And you can take it back to Aristotle, who, you know, used to teach his students kind of walking outdoors. So how can we then actually make it current? Because from what I see within our you know, capitalist system at the moment, and particularly within the work environment, work is done inside, sat down. It's very much presenteeism. You have to be there. You have to be seen for you to actually be working. And actually, as knowledge workers, we've moved beyond that. You can't be productive sat in one place for 9, 10, 12 hours a day. It needs to be split up, but it's still very much grounded back in the roots of, you know, the Industrial Revolution, where you used to clock in and clock out from work. Whereas actually now it's our brains that are prized. We need to be kind of thinking differently. We need to be thinking creatively. And we can't work. Our brains don't operate like that for 9, 12 hours a day. And I find it really quite scary when I kind of, you know, log on to my clients and kind of speak to them. And it's almost this default, you know, how are you today? And they'll just be like, busy or good. And I kind of like, we kind of work through it and kind of come to the conclusion at some point, maybe not on the initial kind of conversation, that actually good and busy lies with some emotional feelings. And actually, how are you as a person? That's going to get away from the head and beyond valuing someone for their levels of productivity and what have they done today, or how many meetings have they sat in today, and how they're automatically scheduled for an hour and they take an hour and then you've got the next one starting on the dot. So I've kind of totally tangent off into my rant about the way business and work seems to happen at the moment, and observations from my coaching at the moment. But hopefully that's given like an insight into my coaching backstory and how I got to where I am now. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about coaching outdoors if possible, but I'll pause.
No, definitely. I mean, I think yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think definitely, because I know you also recently co-authored a chapter on this whole, on coaching outdoors, essentially. So yes, no, tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. So the coaching outdoors, once I'd kind of, it's a thing, and kind of coerced some clients to maybe test it out, and they were it's almost like, for some people, again, it's not rocket science and they get it. For some people, like, actually, yeah, let's have I always have all my good thoughts when I'm out for a walk, and if I'm looking for a coach, actually, is this a thing? So, a part of it is in educating like the business world. So no, I was very fortunate to I got a connection with Henley Business School through Jonathan Passmore. He heard me talk at the International Coach Conference, the International Coach Federation UK chapter conference in London, which I've presented a couple of times, about kind of taking coaching outdoors. And it's been very experiential. For me, it's all about, I don't want to stand up and like lecture a load of theory at you. let's go and have a go. Like, that's my whole approach to everything. It's very facilitative. I love the evidence, but actually I'm a practitioner. How can you apply it? What's the point of just having all these facts and figures? What does it mean to me? How can it support my clients? That's what I'm interested in. So I then went and spoke to the master students on the Henley Business School, masters in behavioral change and coaching. And one of the students who was looking to do her dissertation on taking coaching outdoors, so she loves the evidence, which I do, and I do read it. I just don't kind of quite get into the depths of it that she does. And she went off and did some qualitative interviews, kind of talking to some of my clients and also some other coaches that I pointed her in the direction of as well. And then since then, we've co-authored this chapter in the Coaches Handbook, which in itself is a seminal text. Is great just to kind of dip into all the different facets of coaching, and it kind of goes into the business part as well, which a lot of coaches books kind of like miss out. So we very much kind of build the theory together, and she focused her dissertation on attention restoration theory, which is a theory coined in the 1980s by the Kaplans, and they very much kind of bring it down to, okay, so by heading outdoors, what actually happens to you? There's elements are kind of like around awe sometimes, that kind of feeling like, wow, the earth, wow, the natural planet's amazing. And there's that feeling of extent as well, instead of being kind of confined, where often kind of thought term thinking, because you're inside, you can't see the horizon. Actually, by being outdoors, there is that longer horizon, you can kind of see beyond. So that's just a couple. And if it's something that you're interested, go and check out, the ascension restoration theory. So that's like one theory that she then applied to coaching. And there's other ones as well, whether you look into forest bathing or kind of green blue health. There's a lot more that are now being brought into the coaching world. And coaching itself is a complete mongrel. It does draw from a lot of different disciplines, and in a way now coaching outdoors, we're kind of doing that as well. So Alex, who did a dissertation on this subject, we've now collaborated to do a podcast. So we have our own podcast, the Coaching Outdoors, which is we're basically inviting other practitioners who work within the outdoor space and some thought leaders as well. So, we've had Jonathan Passmore, David Clutterbuck, we've got Peter Hawkins, who we're speaking to on Monday, Liz Hall from Coaching at Work, for them to kind of, give an insight into what they think about this kind of area, and how they see it changing the profession, if they do not, and the benefits of it. But then practitioners as well, who are integrating their own style of coaching and then taking it outdoors, and that in itself is huge, because there's so many different flavors of coaching, and then every coach has their own style. So we've had one, Lizzie, for example, lives down on the southwest, and she does a lot of blue health, a lot of kind of that liminal zone between the sea and the beach and the land, and actually what's going on, what's happening there. And actually when you're going through change, when you're working with clients, ultimately they are going through a process of change. And actually, how can we draw that metaphor from the natural environment into it? And often it's uncomfortable, you don't quite know what's happening, and how can you kind of in a way be creative and get out of your head and use inspiration from the landscape. And then for example, there's another cat who lives up in Edinburgh. She's very much more NLP, and she works a lot more to the NLP processes, but she takes clients out for longer journeys through the landscape, kind of more expedition work, which I know like a lot of your listeners are more kind of expedition. And in a way, I just like to segue slightly here into my expedition kind of history. As part of my role within the British military, I'm a qualified mountain leader, and that in a way has relevance to the outdoor space, partly because I believe as soon as you take people outside, you need to be qualified to look after them. Yes, physically, but also kind of psychologically as well. So for me, the physical side of it is very much, I've led expeditions in, Nepal, Ecuador, Southeast Asia, Morocco. So I've got that kind of, ability to be within the landscape and to be able to dynamically kind of assessing what is going on physically, but also then psychologically being able to meet them. Because emotions can come up and you never kind of know when, and actually how can you kind of contain them or support the other individual to kind of work through that. So yeah, that's the kind of the scope and the depth and the range. And I do believe that as an expedition leader, the ability to have some form of coaching skills, and I saw this when I was taking students to Nepal, for example. We were going 5,500 feet up in the Langtang Valley, and actually walking side by side with them, having these conversations outside of their normal setting. It's often the longest they've been away from home for a month, and just really supporting them through that process of being away And yes, the beginnings and the endings of an expedition itself, how do you manage them? But actually then how do you then take the learnings back into, a lot of them at, secondary school, doing GCSEs or A-levels, how can they then learn? And a lot of it's around confidence and awareness, and just, discovering who they are as an individual.
Definitely. And I think, a big thing in coaching also is and actually just to pause for a second, just for the benefit, because I sometimes make an assumption. I think sometimes when you are really interested in something, you make an assumption that everybody else knows what it is. But just for the purposes of our listeners, just in case people don't actually know what coaching is, I wonder, Anna Marie, do you have a working definition of what coaching is?
So whenever I try, it sounds so trite. So I will offer, this is what I kind of explain to clients when I'm meeting them for the first time, what coaching is. So very much it's around a partnership. It's a conversation that we have together. We're both coming as equals. And it's all about engaging in this kind of creative and thought-provoking dialogue that ultimately creates change to encourage growth. And whether you put potential in there or exceed your potential, it depends. But I kind of, okay, how do I then show up as a coach? What support do I bring? And this is how I kind of frame it. So I kind of have it as a four-way. So basically, when we're working together, I'm there as an accountability buddy. And then I kind of go into the accountability side of things. Okay, sometimes you'll have goals and the like, and it's actually, will you meet them or not? Do you need some support? How can we frame it? How can I help you, ultimately from accountability? And some people are like, it'd be great. Can we check in? Can we do this? Or actually, no, I've got it, and off they go. So accountability, I think, is a big part of coaching. It's an element of being a thinking partner. So it is about our thoughts. How do we manage our thoughts? And in a way, that's a skill in itself. So there is an element of education of how can we manage them? What theories are there? How can we kind of encourage new ideas? Or reframe, for example. So there is that element of kind of being a bit of a thinking partner. And again, it's coming as an equal. And this within coaching, I think, is really important to stipulate. I'm not there as a mentor. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a consultant. I'm not the expert. I'm not telling you. Ultimately, you are the expert in your life. What I'm doing is holding up a mirror just to kind of sometimes strip away things, because often we just are completely blind. When we think of our unconscious and the number of decisions that we make a day, we are very unaware of a lot of them. We're kind of like little robots on default, kind of walking around. So we've got accountability buddy, thinking partner, then critical friend. So it's there, and coaching can be challenging. It's not kind of, I'm going to agree with everything you say. I'm going to spot patterns and trends and kind of point them out and kind of call your bluff at times, and it can be a little bit uncomfortable. And very much, I do appreciate the level of challenge that people can take can change. And yes, if it's too much, and it's all very much about being open and honest and transparent and kind of, yes, it can be push, but then at times it's like, okay, step back. But then it's a noticing that, and then potentially next down the line. Because if you come up against a barrier or some resistance, that's an indicator that something's going on there. That's triggering something inside of, you as an individual. And what is that? And that can take an element of reflection. And then the final is a bit of a cheerleader. And I think, at times we all need a bit of a cheerleader, sometimes to give us a bit of a boost, someone to celebrate. Because a lot of times I have clients who have goals and they're constantly striving towards them. And it's almost they reach their goal and it's like, dink, next. It's like, whoa, okay, stop. Let's just kind of take a moment and pause. Ultimately, we just become just on this constant kind of treadmill trying to achieve the next thing. And actually, how can we really just kind of set it in stay? So that's how I kind of bring it together. It's very much, it's a dialogue, it's a process. And within coaching, yes, you can have coaching conversations. Often the beauty and the magic then unfolds after the conversation, because it will have triggered something, it'll have prompted something. And yes, you can just have a coach-like conversation. If you're a manager at work, you can still have coach-like conversations, and there's loads of tools around having that. It's not then you're going to have a formal coaching conversation, a month down the line. So in a way, coaching it kind of gets a bit, people don't quite understand, and then, well, what's the difference between kind of mentoring or counseling and And coaching for me, I very much frame it, it's about the future space. It's like, where do you want to go? We want to really bring our attention back to the future. However, we may have to go dip into the past to pull things out, because that's how we ultimately form our values and beliefs. And yes, we want to be kind of rooted in the present and have an idea of, what is our reality, what is the truth at the moment. But then you bring the conversation back. It's very, have a very pragmatic approach. It's kind of does boil down to, in the end, okay, so what are you going to do about it? What's your action point? What are you taking away? And I want to be able to give my clients something by the end of the conversation, something really clear that they can then do, whether that is a reflect on something, a think about something, a change behavior, or try to communicate differently. It's something that is tangible and action orientated. Otherwise, it can just descend into a bit of an existential philosophical conversation, which is all very nice, though it actually is at creating tangible change and moving forward.
Yeah. Very well put. And I wonder, just we're coming near the end, but I wonder, just bringing your two passions together, the coaching and the running, how do you apply your coaching brain to your running?
Oh, it's constantly there. It's like I have my little internal voice constantly breaking things down. And I do self-coach a lot. And there's a lot of kind of sanity checking, reframing, chunking, and also that play in time as well, past, present, future. How do I place myself within that? And also just knowing myself and like, what are my values, and bringing it back to my core values. And I think that's a really interesting exercise for anybody. If you've never done that, is to bring it back to your values. Like, what are your core values? Like, what are your top 5 values? And knowing them, and then actually being able to live your life by them each day. And in a way, using it like as a little bit of a checklist. Because often if you're feeling a little bit grumpy or a little bit out of sorts, it's because something is clashing, something is not aligned. So actually, if you don't know what your values are, then how do you even start to kind of unpick your emotions and sit with them? So yeah, that's kind of one takeaway I'd encourage your listeners to do is, go and do a little bit of research around values, and then kind of come up with the values, like what's important to you, like what do you love in your life, and actually being crystal clear on that. And often at some level with coaching, you kind of know the answer already, but then it's all about kind of, externalizing and verbalizing it. It then becomes a lot more real.
Yeah, definitely. And I always find it really fascinating how it is changing, but we don't really get education on that. Well, certainly my generation, we didn't get education about values at school. It wasn't a thing, even during undergraduate, postgraduate study. Values are really only something that I have kind of really taken on board and harnessed over the last 5-6 years in my own journey into coaching. And I still find it really interesting working with people how, you say, what are your values? What are values? It's still growing in terms of our, I think, a societal kind of awareness of values and the importance of values. So, I think that's a wonderful take-home point for our listeners, Anna Marie. And on that note, I am very sad to say that we are getting to the end of our time. And we are going to need to draw this episode to a close. But I just want to thank you, Anna Marie, for a really a very dynamic conversation on two very different yet very aligned areas, coaching and running, because obviously, as you've alluded to, it's the running is both equally a mental and a physical game. So I wonder, obviously you've mentioned about the values, but is there any other kind of take home nuggets that you'd like to leave us with for today?
I think from a running perspective, clearly I'm very biased, though it boils down to movement, and just encourage your listeners to move, whether that is running, whether it is some form of yoga or walk or anything. It is just about, and I'm probably preaching to the converted here already, though even I find myself stood at my desk and it is right, I need to move, I need to get out. So I do think that movement piece is really, really important. And then kind of from the coaching side of things as well, it's just open yourself up to it. If this is something that you've not kind of entertained or heard about before, just kind of think, okay, so who would I be as a coach? What kind of coach would I be? How can I be maybe a little bit more coach like as I move through my day? And whether that is just maybe kind of pausing to ask questions, like open questions, as opposed to the closed yes, no, kind of these open questions, really expansive, and then listen with curiosity, and be present. Because often we will ask a question or have a conversation and actually our minds are somewhere else, or we're kind of racing to think about what we're going to reply to the person. So actually, let's just give that individual the respect and the space to kind of come up with, what they will. So I think that would be my two side of things. I'd love to kind of signpost if people are interested in the coaching outdoors piece to check out our podcast website, which is coaching-outdoors.com, coaching-outdoors.com. And then I've got my own website, which kind of blends the outdoor and the running as well. And that's RFM Coaching. So that stands for Reach for More Coaching, rfmcoaching.com. And I do, I love to kind of, if anyone has any questions or about kind of coaching or running, just feel free to reach out through my website. I am quite active on Instagram, not so much on Twitter anymore, and on LinkedIn as well. There's so many different social platforms and ways to connect these days. But I'm always open to have a conversation. And, I love kind of increasing my network. You never know what opportunities may arise, what can start with a conversation and where it can lead to. So, yeah, I'd love to hear from your listeners.
Brilliant, fabulous stuff. Thank you again, Anna Marie. And thank you very much to our listeners for joining us today. See you next time.